was course code BPCA 131, Perspective on Public Administration. This session is the revision session and we will cover all the approaches we have done so far in the previous classes. So we will start with the revision. Now, if we go through public administration in public present time has become complex and is slowly moving towards enlightened public governance. Thus, to define the term administration and public administration and the relationship between public and private administration and bring out the significance of public administration, let us go through the meaning of public administration. Meaning of public administration could be defined by first understanding the meaning of the word administration. Administration is derived from the Latin word ad plus ministration, which means to care or to look after people, to manage affairs, public or private affairs in the literal sense, and term administration means management of affairs. In this block, we have studied nature and scope of public administration, relationship between public and private administration, and also its significance. Further, in the second unit, we started with the approaches. First was the scientific management approach. Scientific management approach was introduced by F.W. Taylor under his leadership. His theory, which analyzes and synthesizes workflows in an organization. It was coined by Lewis in 1910 and was used by Taylor later, known as Taylorism. Principles of Scientific Management in 1884, he received his degree in mechanical engineering, worked as general manager and also as professor at the Tuckluck School of Business of Dartmouth College. Published by Taylor, the work was The Piece Rate System, Shop Management, Art of Cutting Metals and Principles of Scientific Management. Principles of Scientific Management thus were: first was the rule of thumb, two placed with signs of each element of the work to be done by the worker. Second was the one best way of doing a particular task needs to be determined so that it would help to determine its standard output. Third, as the best method are decided scientifically, we should train, teach, and develop the workers towards output. In order to attain the required output, management should cooperate with the workers, as Taylor identified these characteristics of scientific management. We can summarize them as follows: science and not rule of thumb, working together, cooperation, and not just individual role and responsibility. Maximum output in place of restricted output, encouraging the development of each workers to greatest efficiency and output of each employee or workers. Management approach, which was introduced by F.W. Taylor, in which it implies simply means that public administration must have those principles and methods which are free from ambition and realistic. It focuses on applications of scientific methods to managerial practices and productions processes in industrial organizations. Now, this was the scientific management, which I have just explained in the nutshell. The second approach, what we have gone through, was the administrative approach. Administrative approach, it is characterized by people on the ground share personal experiences, improve practices, and help others to run an organization. The seven principles of administrative approaches were: first was division of work, second was authority, third was discipline, fourth was unity of command, fifth was unity of direction, sixth was subordinate of individual interest to the general interest, and seventh was the remuneration. Henry Farrell believed that efficiency was neutral quest necessary for the improvement of organizations. The main elements of their objectives as observed have been: first was the management oriented theory does not give adequate attention to the problems of workers. Second, lack of importance of informal organization. Third was the concepts borrowed from military science. Fourth was the mechanical approach. Fifth was these principles are based on the assumptions that organizations are closed system. Sixth was the great structure created by these principles do not work well under unstable conditions. And the relevance of the administrative management approach was that it has provided a solid foundation for modern public administration. It includes the primacy of the rule of law. It includes our concern with the efficiency in service delivery. It also emphasizes probability in the use of public funds. It lays down the basis for a strong system of accountability that runs through every level. Management training, education, and research, these principles stress on scientific judgment and logical thinking. They provide manager with useful insights into the reality. That was the administrative approach. Now, third approach in this subject was uh, bureaucratic approach. Bureaucratic approach, Max Weber was the foremost thinker of modern bureaucracy, but G.S. Mill, G.W.F. Hegel were also there, whose comprehensive discussed on bureaucracy said that a bureaucratic theory introduced by Max Weber includes two essential elements. First was including structuring and organization into a hierarchy and having a clearly defined role to help administrator and organization and its members. Bureaucracy implies direct work of government and sometimes referred to bureaucrats as the actual governor of government. Max Weber observed on bureaucracy emerged out of social and historical forces as the period of absolute monarchy in the West and the subsequent phase of national sovereignty. Growth of industrial community and working class conditions, Weber's bureaucracy cannot be restricted to merely providing guidelines to managers. Indeed, Weber inclined to address a perennial debate but put forth with the reference to the basic nature domination in society. Never identify two types of dominance, namely tradition and charismatic tradition. Maybe patronymic or federal in nature, on the other hand, charismatic indicates the traits of leader who possesses exceptional qualities. Later, he recommended a new organizational structure based on rational principles such as logic, efficiency, and reason. This was the bureaucratic approach. Further in this session was the fourth approach was human relation approach. Human relation theory we have already discussed it in all our previous classes. I'm just going through all the approaches just for the revision. Now, human relation approach, as I was saying, human relation theory, once an outcome of the human relation movement, refers to studies made to understand, analyze the effects of social relations, motivations, and employee satisfaction on industrial productivity. Human relation theory is in contrast to the classical theory that laid emphasis on these structural aspects of the organization. It brings to forward the fact that psychological or mechanical variables at workplace do not contribute to increased productivity. Understanding the human psychology, it is very essential, which has been by the human relation approach. Considering that the primary of the organization is to attribute to national or natural human grouping, communication, and leadership. Now, human relation approach by Elton Mayo, termed it clinical approach, it attempts to explain the informal relations among employers and employees, are concerned with moral and psychological rather than legal aspects of an organization. Mayo focused on managers taking more of an interest in the workers, treating them as people who have worthwhile opinion and realizing that workers enjoy interacting together. That was the view of Elton Mayo. The human relation approach propagated by Mayo paved the way for generation of new ideas or group relationship and leadership styles. These subsequently theorists such as Abraham Maslow examined the factors affecting the motivation of individuals working in organization. This is considered as neo relations. Myers-Hubble hypothesis, which considers an individual as pursuing only self-interest, was picked up for further expansion as Theory X and Theory Y by Douglas MacDonald. He made certain assumptions about people and work which had wider implications for leadership and management. That was there in the human relation approach. Now, further, fifth approach was decision making approach. Decision making approach is considered an important process in any organization. The nature of an organization is to determine by the kinds of decision taken in it. This applies to to a government organization as well. Thus, in discipline of public administration, two decision-making approaches is of great relevance, as this approach provides useful interference that can facilitate administrative or policy decisions. So, we are making it thus about the process of arriving and an optimum solution by exploring various alternative choices. These scholars in management and public administration have been involved in various aspects of decision making, and they have made their respective contribution to the approach of decision making. Decision making approach is the process through which one optimal choice is made from several possible alternatives of solutions for a given situation that will ensure maximum benefits and leads to risk that the others which were not selected. That was decision making approach. However, Simon is an important scholar in the field of decision making, and he regards decision making approach as an alternative to the classical principles approach. He further argues that decision making is the core of administrative action and views organization as a structure of decision makers. He regards decision making approach as an alternative to the classical principles approach. He also considered the principles of administration as proverb, and in that place he recommends decision making approach. There were types of decisions which was there by the Herbert Simon. The types of decisions were: first was programmed and non-programmed decisions. Second was organizational and personal decision. Third was generic and unique decision. Fourth was routine and strategic decision. Fifth was policy and operating decision. Four set of activities which are important for a decision making process, which includes uh, intelligence activity. Second was design activity, choice activity, and evaluating activities. This was the process which was included in decision making process. First was the intellectual activity, the intelligence activity, we could say. Second was design activity. Third was choice activity, and fourth was evaluating activity. And in types of decision making process, there were types of decision we have already gone through in detail in our previous sessions of this block. That was block 2. I'm just going through what were the types of basic types of decisions. I've already said programmed and non-programmed was the first type. Second type was organizational and personal decision. Third was generic and unique decision. Fourth was routine and strategic decision. Fifth was policy and operating decision. These were the five types of decisions in decision making approach. Further, we will move on with the sixth approach, that was the system approach. A system defined as any set of distinct elements, components that interact to form a complex whole. The whole is not just the sum of the part of the system itself, but it can be explained only as a totality. That's nothing can in which nothing can be explained by isolating. A component of system. A system processes inputs into outputs. Therefore, each system consists of boundaries, components, interactions between components, input and outputs. That was the system approach. System approach also helps government to confront problems that transverse administrative and territorial boundaries into a holistic manner. They call for constant adjustment throughout the policy cycle, with implications for the ways in which institutions, processes, skills, and actors are organized. Over Simon, therefore, generally means that the administration is seen as a system of interrelated and interdependent parts and tie system comprising subsystems. Structure people, action, and interaction that enable administration to perform certain functions. According to Bernard, initial existence of structure depends upon three elements. First is the willingness of person to contribute efforts to the cooperative system. Second was the an objective of cooperation. Third was the proper communication system. These were the three elements according to Bernard for structure approach. In 1938, he distinguished between formal and informal organization. It defined informal organization as the aggregate of the personal contact and interactions and the associate grouping of people, both the formal and informal organization needs each other as they are interdependent aspects of the same phenomenon. That was the uh, distinguishment between formal and informal, which was given in 1938. That was the system approach. We will further move on with the seventh approach, that was socio-psychological approach. Now, social psychological approach, this approach aims to investigate our social behavior, how we behave in the presence of others. Maslow arranged a person's motivational needs in a hierarchical manner. According to him, there are several needs of human beings which explain human behavior in organizations. These needs have a hierarchy: psychological needs, security needs, social needs, esteem needs, and self actualization needs. These were the needs of a person to motivate several other needs. Understanding the needs of these human beings, the manner can motivate them towards organizational goals with appropriate invention strategies. First, the lowest level of need is psychological need. These are most prominent need for sustaining human life itself, like breathing, thirst, hunger, sleep, and biological satisfaction are the psychological needs without which the people can't survive. Second comes the need for safety, comprising of security, stability, dependency, protection, freedom from fear, anxiety, chaos, needs for structure, order, law, and limits, and so on. That was the second psychological need. Third level of need are the love and belonging needs, which in the world of Maslow involves giving and receiving affection. Fourth level of need was the esteem needs, which involve self worth or esteem and the esteem of others. Maslow notes that it involves the desire for strength, achievement, adequate mastery, and competence, confidence in the face of the world, and dependence and freedom. Fifth psychological need was the highest level of need are the need for self-actualization. This entails maximizing one's potential and to accomplishing something. According to Maslow's definition of self-actualization, Douglas McGurk's theory of X and theory Y, and Herzl's two-factor theory were also there in the social psychological approach. This was there in the social psychological approach. That was the seventh approach in the BPSC 131. Further, we'll move on with the eighth approach, that is public policy approach. Now, public policy approach was the policy from the perspective of the following models and approaches. The selected models approaches to public policy from the perspective of the following models and approaches was: first was the institutional approach in public policy analysis. The institutional study has become a central focus of public policy. Thus, one of the models of the policy making system might be called the institutional approach because it depends on the interaction of those institutions created by the constitution, government, or legislation. Second was the fashion policy model. In fashion policy model, nationality and rationalism are words too often found and used in the literature or social science, but they are more widely espoused than practiced in policy making. However, rationality is considered to be the yardstick of wisdom in policy making. Thomas Day in 2004 equates rationality with efficiency in his words or policy interactions when it is most efficient. That is, if the ratio between the values it achieves and the values it sacrifices is positive and higher than any other policy alternative, the observant that the idea of efficiency involved the calculations of all social, political, and economic values, sacrificed or achieved by policy, public policy, not just those that can be measured in monetary terms. Next model was the group model theory. The group model theory of public policy is based on the hydraulic theory of policy pins in which collective of individuals distinguished by some common attributes or shares relationship. In group theory, policy formulators are often seen scrambling to the pressure of groups through bargaining, negotiation, and compromising. Another important dimension all the groups struggles in the maintenance of equilibrium. In the system and competition among groups, it does not permit any group to become absolutely powerful in a system for all times. That was the uh, group theory policy. Now, further, it was the elite mass theory that was there in public policy approach. Elite mass theory by C. Britt Mill in 1956 is perhaps the leading representative of the elite mass model. According to this theory, public policy is the product of elites reflecting their preferences and values elite or model content that the people are apathetic and ill-informed about public policy. Political public policy approach was there. A significant departure from the rationality model to the vertical policy process approach imposes in the policy making. People have different ideas about what the major concerns and problems confronting the society and about what the government should do about the for global policy makers. Thus, global policymaker must rely on political process. Specific planning approach of policy making was the project planning is a was an attempt to combine the incremental and rational approaches to public policy making. This approaches has the features of reconciling the day-to-day demand with long-range strategies for the future. Strategic planning concentrates on making decisions but blends clashes national analysis with economic and political analysis. That was the models involved in the public policy approaches. Further was the next approach was the ninth approach was the political science approach. political science approach is a methodologically diverse and appropriates many methods orientating in psychology, social research, and philosophy. In political science, in political science approach, the approaches include positivism, interpretivism, rational choice theory, behavioralism, structuralism, post-structuralism, realism, institutionalism, and pluralism. These all approaches we have studied in detail in our previous classes. So I'm just going through it. Now, further in political science approach, we had studied the scope and expansions of policy science approaches. Through the 1970s, the policy science approaches addresses mainly four topics. First was evaluation, second was utilization, implementations, and termination. That were the four addresses mainly in the political science approach. Now, new directions and perspectives in public science approach, although policy research still continues to produce the most systematic and critical analysis of complex and social problems. It is also true that policy science represents only one of these several rational ideologies competing for social and political acceptability. First was the continuity of values and policy sciences. Second was the focus on public management. Third was identity of relevance. Fourth was emphasis on policy inquiry. Fifth was democratization of policy science. And sixth was social network analysis. These were the six ideologies for political science approaches. Further in block 4, the 10th approach we studied was the ecological approach. The, the word ecology has been borrowed from biology, which connects the relationship between animal species and the natural environment. The ecological approach is the forerunner of the general system approach, which was given by Douglas Person in sociology. Frederick Riggs, a socialist himself, developed the concept of ecological approach, which studies dynamic interactions between administrative system and its environment. Riggs was of the opinion that an administrative structure cannot function in isolation of its existing environment, and that it is now he assumed that the administrative system is a subsystem of society which is influenced by other subsystems and in turn influences them. Ecological approach therefore states that administrative system exists in a cultural context which has two-way communication. It's believed that a society has to perform certain functions and their functions compare the individuals to form structures which may be social, economic, political, communications, symbolic. Therefore, administration is culture bound, the ecology of public administration. The ecology of public administration in 1961 has explored the dynamic of interactions between public administration and its external government. Approaches involved in the concept of ecology were first was the agrarian and industrial model. The feature of the area model were limited social and partial mobility and stable local groups, relatively simple and stable occupational differentiation. Existence was of different satisfaction system, predominantly universalistic, specific, and achievement norms. High social and partial mobility, well-developed occupational system was there in the agrarian and industrial models. It also insults from the other social structures. Second was the fused prismatic and diffracted model. Now, in fused prismatic and diffracted model, it was for developing societies. The study of administrative problems of the developing or transitional societies. The basic characteristics of the prismatic society were: first was the heterogeneity, second was formalism, third was overlapping, fourth was nepotism, fifth was polygenism or elite, sixth was polynormativism, and seventh was separation of authority and control. That was the second model in ecological approach. That was fused prismatic and refractive model. Now, third model which was involved in social ecological approach was the bazaar canteen model. The basis of prismatic economy, the economic subsystem is prismatic society, which behaves as subsidized canteen where the goods and services are provided at lower rate or the member of special alert or the politically influenced group who have access to the canteen, and as tributary canteen their higher price are charged to the outsider. That was the bazaar canteen model. Now, in the ecological approach, three models were there. First was the agrarian and industrial model. Second was the fused prismatic and refractory model. Third was the bazaar canteen. That was the 10th approach, which was ecological approach. We move further. The next was the next approach was the that was the 11th approach. That was new public administration approach. Now, new public administration approach, it is an anti-positivism, anti-technical, and anti-hierarchical reactions against traditional public administration. Artist theory is a response to the ever-changing needs of the public and how institutions and administrations go about solving their developed theories. For 21st century, new public administration approach represents the second, the invention in public administration. The first being the NPAs of the late 1960s. The term new public management was coined by Christopher Poole. Concept of new public administration traces its origin to the first Monroe Group Conference held in 1968 under the patronage of William Paul WLDO. This conference was brought together the top scholars in public administration and management to discuss the flag on the state of the field and its future for the first of USA at that time was grappling with unusual social and political unrest. That was the reason for uh, making new public administration. Now, new public administration states that public administration does not function in a vacuum and the administration is responsible toward the needs of the society at large, which therein caters to the problems and manualized of this society. Themes of new public administration have been values, social equity, change, management, worker relations. Then was the pictures of new public administration have been responsiveness, uh, client centricity, structural changes in administration, multidisciplinary nature of public administration. That was the sponsored need of the public administration approach. Now, 12th approach was public choice approach. The public choice approach, the term public choice approach (PCA) was coined in the late 1960s and is gained prominence in the discipline of public administration in the 1970s. Vincent Ostrom, one of the pioneers of PC, considers this approach as the most appropriate one to the study of union administration and state that the public administration scholars should turn away from traditional bureaucratic approach and move towards public choice approach. Basic feature of PCA were first was the methodological basis of PCA, that is notion of rationality, methodological individualism and political exchange. Features of PCA, it implies economic logic to the problem of public service distribution, then removes more complications in the delivery of public services. It emphasizes privatizations or contracting out to reduce wastage. That was there in the public choice approach. Next was the 13th approach, was the public interest approach. Now, public interest approach, the concept of public interest approach can be said to be a voyage right from the time immemorial where people started to live together as a society, which in itself is a measure taken to protect each other's welfare, both in the ancient and the medieval times of both the world and the Indian history also. The welfare of the people were considered as public interest in the past. However, in recent times, the notion of public interest has changed, wherein the inconvenience to the public good was spoken about. For example, in 1609, French used the term public interest to donate the action taken by the government to evoke justice for an unjustified or illegal action. Approaches to public interest, the different approaches to public interest as discussed by Corhan in 1974 and Johnston in 2017 were as follows. First was the abolition approach of public interest. Second was the normative theory of public interest. Third was the consensualistic communitarian approach. Fourth was the process theories, and process theories are composed of theorists who define public interest by looking into political process through policy is made as per their as per this, there are three theories of public interest. Each focuses on how public interest is served during the process of compromise or accommodation. First was the aggregative model, second was the pluralist model, and third was the procedural model. So these were the three uh, models which focuses on how public interest is served during the process of compromise or accommodation. That was the public interest approach. Now, further was the 14th approach, that was the new public management approach. The new public management approach was doctrined and termed by Christopher Hood in 1991, unlabeled various as managerialism, market-based approach to public administration. Post-bureaucratic paradigm is marked by certain distinct features. From these work, we can reduce the following distinct characteristics of NPA. The basic characteristics of NPM, that is new public management approach. First characteristic was complementing managerial along with policy making skills, adopting private sector managerial practices by the public sector. Third was the setting explicit measures of performance standards for public organization, making service more responsive to the needs of the customer and ensuring value for money using information technology to facilitate better service delivery, making public administration customer driven to enhance service ethic and efficiency. The model they conceptualized as the following was in the public administration customers. The first there were 10 forms of conceptualized model. First was the catalytic government. Second was the community oriented government. Third was the competitive government. Fourth was the mission-driven government. Fifth was the result-oriented government. Sixth was the customer-driven government. Seventh was the enterprising government. Eighth was the anticipatory government. Ninth was decentralized government. And the last one, that is the 10th one, was the effort-oriented government. The impact of NPA reforms were very huge. There was the managerial predominance over the policy capacity. Second impact was the reinforcement of policy administration. Then absence of clear-cut concepts of accountability was there. Uh, then it also impact on rendering citizens as customers, also providing only managerial solutions to public sector problems. It was the impact of NPA reforms. Clash of good values between traditional and new public administration were also being seen. That was the new public management approach. I'll just go through the 10 forms of new public management approach. Just quickly go through it. First was the catalytic government. Second was the community-oriented government. Third was the competitive government. Fourth was the mission-driven government. Fifth was the result-oriented government. Sixth was the customer-driven government. Seventh was the enterprising government. Eighth was the anticipatory government. Ninth was decentralized government. And the last one, that is the 10th one, was the effort-oriented government. That was the new public management approach. Next approach was the 15th approach in this subject was the good governance approach. Now, in good governance approach, in order to understand the concept of good governance, we must be clear about the wider concept of state which comprises government and governments, governor and governments. Government is a major constituent of state as it is an instrument through which the state strives to accomplish its goals and objectives. That was the major difference between governance and government. Characteristics of good governance could be said as one, it should, first thing is that it should be protecting the environment by ensuring that economic growth does not cause environmental degradation. To conceptualize good governance and constitute its basic characteristics, which includes first was the participation, then rule of law, transparency, responsiveness, equity, effectiveness and efficiency, accountability and predictability. That was the characteristics which was included in the good governance approach. Good governance aims at improving the quality of life of citizens, enhancing the effectiveness and efficiency of administration, securing the freedom of information and expression, providing citizen friendly and citizen caring administration. Ensuring accountability using information technology based services to improve citizen government interface, improving enhancing the productivity of employees, promoting organizational pluralism, state, market, and civil society, organization for good governance. That was the mm, that was the responsibility of the good governance. Further, we will move on. And the governance approach was that enhancing the productivity of employees, promoting organizational pluralism, state, market and civil society organization. Good governance also aims at achieving much more than efficient management of economic and financial resources or public service. It is a broad reform strategies to make government more open, responsible, accountable, and democratic, regulates private sector and strengthen institutions of civil society. That was the good governance approach. I'll just repeat the goals and objectives of good governance or the characteristics of good governance. First characteristic is to protecting the environment by ensuring that economic growth does not cause environmental degradation. Its basic characteristics also includes participation, rule of law, transparency, responsiveness, equity, effectiveness, and efficiency, accountability, and predictability. Good governance aims at improving the quality of life of citizens. It also aims at enhancing the effectiveness and efficiency of administration. Also, securing the freedom of information and expression, providing citizen friendly and citizen caring administration, also ensuring accountability using information technology based services to improve citizen government interface. It also improves and enhance the productivity of employees, which promotes organization pluralism in state, market, and civil society organization for good governance. That was the approach of good governance approach. Now, now next approach was the postmodern approach. That was the 16th approach in this subject BPSC 131. Now, postmodern approach, the factor for the rise of postmodernism, was the idea of modernity, positivity, empiricity, legal rational, and decline in trust in science and government. That was the basic factor which gave the rise of postmodern approach. Now, a further social fragmentations, contextuality, spectrism, preference for small and local were also the reason for the factor of rise of postmodernism idea. Traits of postmodern theories were the postmodernism challenges the traditional to approaches, and second was to increasing the knowledge acquisition as they follow a host of qualitative methods like dialect, historical analysis, etc. Bogus on 2005 presents the traits of postmodern public administration theory as dialectic, deconstruction, deterritorialization, imagination, and alternative. That was the traits of postmodern public administration theory. I will just repeat once again that first was the dialectic, second was the deconstruction, third was the deterritorialization, fourth was the imagination and alternative, and then the postmodern ideas and practices. These were the four traits of postmodern approach. Now, ideas and practices were the phenomenological approach. What was the ideas which was propagated in postmodern approach? First was the phenomenological approach. Then was the interpretative theory, critical theory, discourse analysis, feminist discourse were the major few of the ideas and practices of postmodern approach. The major focus of postmodern approach to public administration was dialogue and participatory governing, direct citizens' participation from nation building to network. That was the main focus of postmodern approach. Last approach in this subject was the 17th approach, that was the feminist approach. A feminist is someone who identifies with gender as an usually useful category of analysis, ethically perspective on women's current status and prospects to use in a system of ideas and practices, which assumes that men and women must share equally in the world, in their privileges, in defining and remind of the world. Feminism is not one military concept, but instead a diverse and multi-facious grouping of ideas and actions, despite the fact that the feminist movement comprises different and even contradictory political viewpoints like liberal, Marxist, socialist, radical, postmodern, to name a few, nevertheless, all have a firm faith in the equity of men and women and are committed to the eliminations of gender based injustice. Therefore, using a general insist means working to make gender visible in social phenomena, asking if how and why social processes, standards, and opportunities differ systematically for women and men. Gender of government, the central mechanism by which this execution is realized, is the assumptions of a nature separation between the public and the private. It is assumed that the political is public and that the private only of the domestic. In other words, with politics restricted to public sector sphere of human life and perceived as an arena of male activities, private or personal belief, by contrast, has made come to the soon as the sphere reserved for women. That was the feminist approach. That was the last approach uh, in this subject. I'll just quickly go through all the approaches once again. In the subject BPSC 131, that is Perspective on Public Administration. In our previous all classes, we have studied all the approaches very in detail, and the approaches which are involved, I'll just go through it once again. In the first block, we had studied the scientific approach, administrative approach, and bureaucratic approach. I'll quickly go through it once again. In the second block, we had studied the human relation approach, decision making approach, and system approach. Further, in block 3, public policy approach, political science approach, social psychological approach. These were the three uh, approaches in block 3. In block 4, an ecological approach, new public administration approach, public choice approach, public interest approach were there. And last block, that was the block 5, new public management approach, good governance approach, postmodern approach, and last, the feminist approach was there. So, altogether, we have studied the meaning of public administration, nature and scope of public administration, uh, and also the 17th approaches in this unit of perspective on public administration. I'll just go through quickly all the approaches just for the definition's sake. First was the scientific management approach. Scientific management approach was introduced by F. W. Taylor under his leadership theory, which analyzes and synthesizes workflow in an organization. It was coined by Lewis in 1910 and was used by Taylor, later known as Taylorism. That was the scientific management approach. The basic publications of Taylor was the Piece Rate System, Shop Management, Art of Cutting Metals, and Principles of Scientific Management. Principles of scientific management thus were the first was the rule of thumb, Second was the one best way of doing particular task needs to be determined so that it would help to determine a standard output. Third was the best methods are decided scientifically. We should train, teach, and develop the workers towards output. In order Fourth was, in order to attain the required output, management should cooperate with the workers. As Taylor identified these characteristics of scientific management, we can summarize them as follows: science and not rule of thumb, working together, cooperation and not just individual role and responsibility. Maximum output in place of restricted output, encouraging the development of each workers. That was the scientific management. Administrative approach provides that it has provided a solid foundation for modern public administration. Includes the primacy of the rule of law. It includes the and concern for efficiency in service delivery. Emphasizes probability in the use of public funds. It lays down the basis for a strong system of accountability that runs through every level. That was the administrative approach. The seven principles of administrative approach was: first was division of work, second was authority, third was discipline, fourth was unity of command, fifth was unity of direction, sixth was subordination of individual interest to the general interest, and seventh was the remuneration. That was the seven principles of administrative approach. Further was the bureaucratic approach. Max Weber observation on bureaucratic emerged out of the social and historical forces as the period of absolute monarchy in the West and the subsequently phase of national sovereignty, growth of industrial community and working class tradition. Weber's bureaucracy cannot be restricted to merely providing guidelines to managers only. Weber inclined it to address a perennial debate and put forward with reference to the basic nature domination in society. That was the bureaucratic approach. It all implies direct work of government and sometimes refer to bureaucrats as the actual governor or government. Next was the human relation approach. Human relation approach by Elton Mayo termed it clinical approach. It attempts to explain the informal relations among employer and employees are connected with moral and psychological rather than legal aspects of an organization. Human relation approach propagated by Mayo paved the way for generation of new ideas or group relations and leadership styles. Fifth was the decision making approach. The types of decision making were the programmed and non-programmed decision, organizational and personal decision, generic and critic decision, routine and strategic decision, which was the policy and operating decision. Four set of activities which are important for the decision making process, which includes first the intelligence activity, second was the design activity, third was choice activity, fourth was evaluating activities. Decision making is considered an important process of any of the organization. That was coined by the Herbert Simon. Now, the system approach. The system approach is defined as any set of distinct elements, components that interact to form a complex whole. Whole is not just the sum and part of the system itself. It can be explained only as a totality. Then was the social psychological approach that was coined by the approach investment of social behavior. Uh, the According to Maslow, definition of self-actualization developed Macron theory X and theory Y, and Herbert's two-factor theory were also there in the social psychological approach. Eighth approach was public policy approach. Public policy approach had fashion policy models, group model theories by Thomas Day in 2004. Elite mass theory was also there by C. W. Richmond in 1956. Ninth approach was the political science approach. Political science approach is the methodology that diverse and appropriate many methods oriented in the psychology. It focuses on public management, identity of relevance, emphasis on policy inquiry, democratization of policy science, and social networking analysis. Then was the ecological approach by Frederick Riggs, a socialist himself, developed the concept of ecological approach in which the basic models were the agrarian and industrial model. There was the fused prismatic diffractive model, then was the bazaar candy model. New public administration approach was by coined by Christopher Hood. Concept of new public administration traces its origin to the first Monroe Book Conference held in 1968. Values, social equity, changes, management work, relations, pictures of new public administration as the responsible. Client-centricity, structural changes in administration, multidisciplinary nature of public administration was there in new public administration approach. 12th approach was the public choice approach. The public choice approach, PCA, was coined in the late 1960s. Methodology, individualism, political exchange features the PCA. It implies economic logic to the problem of public service distribution, removes more complexes in the diversity of public service, emphasizes privatization or contracting out of reduced wage. That was the 13th approach was the public interest approach by Fortune 1974 and Johnston in 2017. The abolition approach of public interest, normative theory of public interest, conceptualistic communitarian process theories. The process theories are composed of theorists who define public interest by looking into political process. That was the public interest approach. 14th approach was new public management approach. So we will end this session of vision or perspective on public administration, APAC 131.